G'day everyone, my name is Brent May. I restore cars for a living and I build engines. And today I want to show you a little bit about how to restore all of your nuts and bolts. Yes, you might be thinking that they're just the humble little fixings that hold two parts together on a car, but they might have been on there for about 50 or 60 years. And you might be thinking, what do I do with all of those? Do I throw them away? Do I start again? Do I buy new parts? Well, I'm going to show you how you can take those parts and with a little bit of TLC, you can make them last another 50 or 60 years. Today I want to answer one of the most overlooked questions when it comes to car restoration, and that is, what do I do with all the nuts and bolts? Well, it's not actually that hard, so let's get into it. To start off with, you need a plan. You can't just pull a car apart and expect to know where every single part goes. Nobody knows that. It doesn't matter who you are or how long you've been working in the industry, you could never pull a whole car apart and lay every single part out on the floor and know exactly where every single part goes. So you need to have some kind of plan. Now, the best way to do that is to start off with a parts book. Now, a parts book is a really good starting point because it will show you obviously the layout of all of your parts, but it will also show you things like whether that nut is meant to have a washer underneath it, or if it is meant to have a washer, what kind of washer. Often you'll pull a car apart and you'll find spring washers in place that there's meant to be flat washers, or flat washers in places that there's meant to be star washers. And as you go, it's nice to actually rectify some of these little mistakes that have happened over the years and actually put the original hardware where it's supposed to be. So a parts book can really help you with that. Now, apart from having a parts book, you need to have a plan as to what you're actually doing here. Don't just pull everything apart and throw it in a box and deal with it later, because you will never ever work out where that part goes. So when you're pulling apart a car, you need to actually keep everything separated until such time as you can catalog it. There are some tools and equipment that you are going to need. You are going to need a wash tank, a bench grinder, a wire wheel, a flat file, and something to record what you've actually got. A lathe can be super helpful, and so can a drill press. Now, I know that not everyone has these things, but if you do have them, or if you're thinking of getting them, they are invaluable. They are the sort of things that I will use every day without fail. I often don't make things with a lathe, but I often use a lathe to repair things. You can spin up parts in a lathe and polish them or linish them or repair threads or whatever it is. There's many things that you can use a lathe for to actually repair parts. You don't need a big industrial sized lathe like the one I've got here. You can buy yourself a nice hobby lathe for a few $100s and you will be using it all the time if you're restoring cars. When I'm pulling a car apart, I will generally also have a stack of Ziploc bags, and as I go, I just bag everything up and then I'll just write on the front what it is. So you might have a bag that's just front brakes, you might have another bag that's all of your rear brakes, you might have another bag that's all your front suspension and steering. Whatever it is, have some kind of system. Now it's time to actually clean all of your parts. So you need to still keep all your parts in some kind of order so that they're not all jumbled up yet, because you still need to catalog them at some point. So take each sub-assembly on its own. It can be a little bit time consuming to do it this way, but I find it's the best way to actually make sure that you don't mix everything up. Start with each sub-assembly and just give it a quick wash. It doesn't have to be super fancy, you're not trying to eat off it. You just need to get rid of all of the grit and road grime and engine oil and stuff off it so that you can actually lay it out on the bench, and then you can catalog it. So once everything's clean and you've laid it all out on the bench, now is the time that you start to catalog everything. Now, we like to catalog everything as quick as possible because pretty soon everything's going to get jumbled into a big pile. So you need to be able to catalog all of your parts on your bench so that at any time, it doesn't matter who looks at your parts or what day of the week it is, or whether it's in a year from now or 10 years from now, you can always come back to that list and say, oh, I know that holding on the front springs are XYZ. You know the length, you know the diameter, you know what sort of washer's meant to be there, you know what sort of nut is meant to be there, all that kind of information, it's all important. So what I do is I just open the Numbers app on my iPad and I run a few columns. So the first column will be what the part is. So I might say bolt M8 by 50 mil. The second column will be the quantity, and the third column will be what kind of finish it is. So is it blue zinc, is it gold zinc, is it cad plated, is it copper plated? Start with a sub-assembly that you're pretty familiar with. Take it from your bench and write a heading. Write down the quantity, the description, the type of finish, any other kind of identifiers. Maybe there's some special markings on the head of those bolts. You need to be able to record all of that information because later on down the track, you need to be able to recall that information. Now, sometimes two bolts may look exactly the same, but they might be a different grade of bolt. Now, the reason for that is certain critical parts on a car, whether it be suspension pickup points or brake calipers or something that needs a heavier duty bolt, will generally use a higher grade of bolt. Now, you might have two bolts that are the same size and the same diameter, but you switch those over and all of a sudden you're putting a piece of cheese to hold on your brake calipers. So you need to be kind of careful of that. Now, often on the heads of the bolts, they will put some kind of identifier. There will be a grade marking or some sort of marking on the head of the bolt to let you know what the tensile strength of that bolt is. So work that out as you go, listing as much information as you can on the part that you've got in your hand will make it a lot easier when it comes time to reassembling the car to work out where that part is supposed to go. Once you've catalogued everything and you've worked out all of the parts that you have and whether you've got anything missing or whether you need to source some more bits or whatever it is, you can go ahead and throw it all in a box. Because now we're at the point where we can actually de-rust everything. So you can throw it all in a box, take it over to your bench grinder, and now it's probably the most time-consuming part of the whole process, which is buffing each part to get rid of all the rust, to get rid of all the crud from out of the threads, all the corrosion, all the dirt. It needs to be really clean as you can get it on the wire wheel. This is going to be quite time consuming. So take your time, start at somewhere logical. Maybe you want to do all of your washers first. Maybe you want to do all of your nuts first, whatever. It doesn't really matter how you do it. At this point, everything's cataloged, so it can all get mixed up. So you're not worried about anything getting jumbled up. You've already recorded that information, so that shouldn't be a problem. So go ahead and start buffing all of your parts. Get rid of all of that dirt and corrosion and rust from in the threads. Make sure you get around all of the hexes on the bolts, on the heads of the bolts. They want to come out looking pretty silver and shiny because that's what they will look like without any plating on them and without any rust. And that's the base that we want to start at when we get our parts replated. The cleaner that you can get these parts now, the better the zinc plating will work. And not just zinc plating, but copper plating and CAD plating and whatever it is that you're doing. The cleaner that you get the parts now and as much corrosion that you can remove, the better the result's going to be. So once you've finally got through your pile of rusty hardware and now it's all nice and bright and shiny, you're at the point now where you can look at what is ready to be replated and what needs a little bit of extra work. Now, if you're lucky and if the car hasn't been messed around with too much, you'll probably find that a lot of your nuts and bolts will be ready to replate. You can just put them in a box and send them off to your zinc plater and job done. But more often than not, you'll find that a lot of your hardware needs some extra work. Now, it's not a big deal. It's not damaged. It's not a throwaway item. But often you'll find with bolts and nuts, over time, maybe the car's been pulled apart a few times and someone's put the wrong size socket on there, or they've been a bit ham-fisted, and the edges of hexes become a little bit rounded and they get a bit dog-eared and burred, and you need to get rid of all that. So you need to pick up each part on its own, just give it a little visual inspection. Pick it up, have a look at it. Oh no, that needs a little bit of extra work. Put it in a pile of parts that need a little bit of extra work. For everything that's good, put it in the done pile. That's ready to be plated. So now what you do is you pick out all of the parts that need a little bit of extra work, where you think they're not quite perfect. They're not bad, but they're not quite perfect. You need to work out what you can do with those. For something like a bolt, it's just a simple case of taking the bolt and a nice sharp flat file, nothing too coarse. You're not trying to actually take material off. All you're trying to do is each of these 6 sides, you're really just knocking the highs off. Where it's been a little bit damaged or burred, just a few passes by hand just to knock off the highs, and that will make that look pretty much brand new. The other thing that you might find with a bolt like this is that once you've got all the hexes nice and flat and you've gotten rid of all the burrs, the chamfered edge on them might still be a little bit burred. A bolt like this, it's just a simple case of spinning that up in the lathe, grabbing your file and just holding it to that chamfered edge. You may sometimes find with some of your bolts that the threads are usable, but they're maybe a little bit knocked around a little bit. Now, some people like to use a tap and die set to repair threads. You can do that, but I often find with taps and dies that, especially a die, they will actually cut material out, and you want to try and keep as much material on there as possible. So instead of using a die, I think the best thing to probably use for that would be a thread file. Now, what this will tend to do, instead of cutting a new thread and taking material off your part, it will tend to bend the thread back or squash it back into shape. So it doesn't necessarily take material off. It will tend to repair what's already there before it cuts a new thread. And I find that's probably a better way to repair threads than to use a die set. That's basically all there is to it. Once you've cleaned all your parts, deburred them, de-rusted them, and made sure that every part that you've got is absolutely perfect and ready to be plated, then you're done. It's just a matter of separating them out into your different types of plating, boxing them up, shipping them off for plating, and then once you get them back, they should look a little bit like this. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and in the comments below, let me know what you're working on at the moment. I'm always fascinated to hear what people have got in their garage that they're tinkering away with. Everyone's got a story to tell, and I'd love to hear it. And I will see you guys next time.